Hello, and welcome back to I'll Have What She's Having, the podcast where we talk about absolutely everything to do with relationships, sex, and living a fully turned on life. Today, we're diving into a slightly taboo topic, my favorite to explore, as in the tabooness, not necessarily this one. We're shedding some light on something a lot of people find very uncomfortable, which is affairs. And no, I absolutely do not condone the dishonesty and the lying that is involved, but today I wanted to approach it from a place of curiosity. What if we put down the black and white thinking of this is right or wrong and instead looked at it from, okay, millions of people are having affairs, not because they're bad people, but because something is missing in their lives, because they might feel like they have no other choice. And a myriad of other reasons that we're going to explore with someone who's very knowledgeable on this topic. What I found so interesting about today's conversation is that what's missing isn't always what we think. And so today I'm sitting down with Paul Keable, who's been with Ashley Madison for over a decade. And he's had a front row seat to one of the largest data sets on human desire, intimacy, and relationships, probably in the world. So Ashley Madison is one of the world's premier dating sites that positions itself especially for affairs. Their tagline is "Life is short, have an affair." At first, I think a lot of us cringe at this, right? But what we talk about today allows us a deeper look at what's going on, right? Why people actually have affairs, and that it's not just about sex, and what the biggest misconceptions are when it comes to what men and women desire, right? What are the common reasons that people turn to affairs in their lives? Why so many women in affairs are coming from sexless or unfulfilling relationships, and why so many men are actually just craving feeling wanted. And ultimately, we're looking into why do people seek affairs in the first place and what happens after they do? More than anything, this conversation keeps coming back to one thing, which is communication, right? The conversations we're not having with our partners, the desires that we're afraid to speak, and what happens when those parts of us go unmet for way too long. This episode is really not about promoting or condemning anything. It's about understanding human behavior so that you can create a relationship that actually works for you and doesn't end up in a place that you don't want to be in. So whether you're monogamous or non-monogamous or somewhere in between, the real question is, are you actually getting your needs met? Because non-monogamous people can also cheat. Cheating is simply dishonesty, right? It's breaking the agreements that you've made between yourself and your partner. So before we get into it, I have a few quick announcements for you. First, I really want to celebrate that we just had a fabulous 3-day retreat here in BC, Canada. It literally changed lives, and those words are straight from the participants' mouths. They awakened in their sexuality, they increased their body confidence exponentially, and they've been initiated as wild women. And the next one is a whole week in Mexico next February. It's called Wild Women Unleashed. It will be launching soon, so before then, you could grab your early bird ticket pricing by getting yourself on the wait list at my website, krishall.ca. It's all in the show notes. You can check out the details. And remember that this is an initiation into your next self, into the version of you that's ready to be wild and sexually free, who's ready to feel confident in your body and in tune with the greater rhythms of your womanhood and of nature itself. We'll be staying at this luxurious retreat space surrounded by thick jungle. We don't have any neighbors for quite a while, and we have an intimate group of sisters that will be joining you, and we will be learning the essential pleasure skills that we were never taught. I am so unbelievably excited for this experience, and if you think it's for you, apply now. Join the waitlist at the link in the show notes. Next, I'd like to tell you how you can work with me. So I offer one-on-one sex coaching that is completely tailored to you and your specific needs. I offer a 15-minute consultation call to get you started, where we can chat about what's really going on for you in sex and relationships. And then after that, the first coaching call is at a reduced price so that you can really get to know my methods before saying, fuck yes, I'm in. Let's do this. Let's work together. So you can book your first call using a link in the show notes as well. And lastly, I want to give a shout out to the most amazing sex toys that I've found in a while. They have crystal yoni wands and yoni eggs and butt plugs, and they're all offered at a store called wands.com, wands with two A's. Head on over there, check out their stuff. It's made by women and it's Canadian, which makes me so excited. And if you want to buy some goodies, use my code KRIS10, Kris with a K, for a sweet 10% off. Your pleasure will thank you later. All right, now on to the episode. Hello and welcome. I'm so excited to have you here today. Yeah, let's just get started right off with I'd love you to introduce yourself to the listeners. And if you could break it down in just like one sentence, what is your biggest takeaway from working at Ashley Madison?
Thank you so much for having me on today, Chris. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to the conversation. In my role, I've been with the company now close to 13 years, I think. And I think the thing that has been the most revealing to me, if I look at the big picture, is how much of our desires and of our interests of an intimate nature, not just purely sexual, are so often unmet or unfulfilled because of our inability or lack of willingness to be bold enough to speak it, to say to a trusted partner, this is who I am, this is what I want, and this is how I want it. And our inability to communicate with each other on a trusted level so often is the barrier to getting what we generally both kind of want. And I think one of the biggest reasons our business has been so successful, we've been around for well over 20 years at this point, is that we have a community of people that tend to be far more honest about their intentions and needs because it's been missing from either their primary life or just in general their personal intimate life. And so they've come to a place where there is, from a community perspective, a lack of judgment and a willingness to listen. And if it's, you're looking for something I'm not looking for, I'm not going to judge you, but we're not going to be a match, and that's okay. And I think that to me is something I try to tell people in my external life, to say, listen to what my members tell me, and it might benefit you.
Yeah, I love that it really just comes down to communication and that people aren't really truly able to open up to their partners about what they want, what they're feeling. And then that does lead to feeling a need to seek that sort of like validation and that, yeah, intimacy elsewhere. And so, with kind of, you almost have like access to one of the biggest data sets on human desire ever, which is amazing. And so, what do you think people misunderstand about affairs?
Well, yeah, I think we're probably a little bit of a modern day Kinsey Institute, if that makes any sense. The interesting thing about affairs is the what's the driving rationale for why people choose to have an affair. And I think there's a massive misconception in the market or in the world, generally speaking, as it pertains to why the different sexes have affairs, why do men versus women have affairs. So we have this often Hollywood perception that men who have these, incredible libidos and all they want to do is have sex, particularly with the young intern in the office. Well, that certainly is a reality for some people. We actually had a researcher from the University of Missouri, Dr. Alicia Walker, come to us because she wanted to see if are these myths, are these stories accurate? Are they true? Turns out they're not. 80% of the women in her study who came to Ashley Madison were in sexless or orgasmless marriages. So they were seeking to outsource their intimate needs by Ashley Madison because, in essence, they actually love their partners. They love their life. They weren't looking to disrupt it. And more often than not, from the stories I've been told and the members I've spoken to, females do tell their partners something's missing, that they want something different, and they do try to express that, and even sometimes going so far as marital therapy, but their partner is either unwilling or incapable of fulfilling that specific interest or need. And so that often leads women to come to us. And interestingly enough, men seeking emotional validation, the majority of men in this study were seeking to be desired, to be wanted. And so after many years of being in their marriage, in their primary relationship, they felt that, I don't think they would use the words taken for granted, but that's the feeling it says. And that comes down to in Western culture, we are sort of well conditioned to provide aesthetic based compliments to women. Oh, Chris, your hair looks beautiful. I think that's a nice shade of lipstick. Things that would be expected to be heard from a man to a woman, but it's rarer to hear it in the reverse. A woman saying to a man, "Hey, Paul, I really like the way those glasses fit in your face. I think that's a nice haircut." We don't get those types of compliments because men are supposed to be stoic. We're supposed to suppress our emotions and be providers and all this other silliness around what's a real man. And it prevents us from getting what we want. And so it's not that it's quote unquote the fault of the woman. I'm not blaming her. What I'm saying is society's created these gender dynamics and we fall into them because they seem to make sense, but then reality shows up and then we don't know how to deal with it. And it gets back to my original point, communication.
Mhm. Yeah, so what you're seeing is a real difference between what men are seeking and what women are seeking. And so is there a difference in really what they receive at the end of their experience? Or like what do we see in the differences of what happens after an affair between
Well,
men
it's
and
interesting.
women?
Yeah, we had another researcher from the University of Minnesota Duluth, Dr. Ashley Thompson. She wanted to study the outcomes of affairs. And interestingly, 30% of her respondents, men and women, indicated that their primary relationship improved because of their affair. And so if you go back to the reasonings for having an affair, if that it is scratched and the tension that was building every day, every weekend I didn't get good sex, or every weekend I felt ignored, that stress builds up and there's not really a good outlet for it. And if you have that affair in any variation of it, it often alleviates that stress and you can go back and feel better about your primary relationship. And that's an interesting outcome. The majority of people didn't have a negative impact on their primary relationship, but 30% had a positive impact on their primary relationship. And I think that, really makes people uncomfortable with the idea that an affair can improve my marriage. And I am a firm believer that we likely save more marriages than we end.
That's really interesting. Actually, the one thought that comes to my mind about like, women coming back into the relationship after having like more sexual satisfaction is actually like I'm not sure if you're aware, but this like dildos were invented and vibrators were invented because women had to like go to the doctor to go because they had hysteria, right? This illness that people presented with. Basically, it was unsexually satisfied women. And so they went to the doctor and the doctor would actually like
Manually
masturbate, like,
stimulate them. Yes.
manually stimulate them, and so that's how dildos and, sex toys kind of started to get invented because they were too tired to do it, and so they, got a vibrator, which is the most ridiculous story, but that honestly, it kind of has the same vein of, like, if you're not sexually satisfied, like, this really shows how sex is such a big human need, and when we position it as, like, a want or a nice to have, we don't get to be fully expressed. We like, so many other parts of our lives suffer because of it. So I find that really interesting.
No, you're 100% right. And, we're not, particularly again in Western culture, we're not trained well, we're not educated around sexual dynamics. Most of our education on Gen X would have been mostly around STDs and preventing pregnancies. Great, that's a good start. My kids who are teenagers, they're getting that same education plus, information around consent. Also great. But what we don't ever get is what's good sex? What's good sex for a woman? What's good sex for a man? How do we talk about sex? How do we convey something? And when I said earlier about the lack of communication and the inability to tell a trusted partner your intimate desires and needs, it's not just that inability to say it, it's also the inability for so many people to receive that information because your partner needs to trust you, not for you to necessarily say yes to everything. That's not the point. It's to be safe enough to say, okay, maybe that's not for me, but let's talk about how we make a compromise without shaming that person for whatever interest they may have. And I know many of your readers, might be thinking I'm thinking about some very extreme fringe sexual activities. I'm not at all. People have very repressed sexual lives because they haven't had the chance to explore. And until such time that they feel trusted or have a partner that they trust, they're not going to express themselves. They're not going to try to explore new spaces because they're so afraid of being shamed and ridiculed for their interests. And if that, infects your relationship, it's very difficult to overcome that.
Yeah. It's so difficult. There's so many like I find it really interesting to talk about, yeah, that communication piece, especially like it keeps coming back. It's always going to come back because like even when people, come to me seeking like tantric sex and better sex, like the first thing to talk about is always the communication. And you're right, like if you don't like receive this information well, so do you have any insight on how to receive this information and how to be more open to what your partner has to say?
So I think I tell couples first and foremost, you have to get to a place where can articulate your interests and desires, build time and space around a place to have that conversation. You don't want to introduce new ideas in the middle of a sex session. That's a bad time to have it because emotions are high, tension is high, adrenaline's pumping. That's not the time and place to have it. So you have to separate it from the bedroom. And remember that, as the receiving partner getting information, to not judge them, to say, okay, maybe that is not for me, but let me think about, a way to, accommodate that, make a compromise. So you don't always need an immediate reaction. So both partners need to be aware that just this just because a request was made or was indicated, my response doesn't have to be immediate because I might need time to consider it and be open to your partner asking them the question back. What's the underlying motivation on this? Where did you get this idea? Where do you think you first were inspired to start to pursue the space? Because understanding how we come to our interests, I think, is very validating in terms of how to find a path forward, whether it's going to be that express explicit act or something that is more of a compromise. And it all comes down to, having space and time to consider and think and be responsive to your partner's interests. And, I relate this to, I should say, some of the other types of conversations that people have related to sex and relationships and why they end up on Ashley Madison. Sometimes in a relationship, your partner will turn to you at a later point in life and say, listen, you know, Kris, I love you. Our relationship's amazing. We've had this beautiful life. I expect us to continue on forevermore. But by the way, the bedroom's now off limits to you and or to me because I no longer wish to have an intimate relationship with you. And it's not because I don't want to have one with anybody. Now, if you're going to take that position, you've now left your partner in a very difficult spot because if they love and respect and trust you, they're going to honor that request, obviously. But that doesn't mean that their intimate desires have ended. Are you going to be comfortable talking to them about how do they make an accommodation? Are you going to be comfortable them expressing a need to see somebody else in the absence of the physical, connection that is now no longer available to me in my primary relationship? And I think these are some of the dynamics that ultimately happen. And people, again, they do have the conversations and they often can't come to that compromise. And that's why a place like ours exists. I mean, we've had more than 91 million members join since we launched. And I think that's really indicative of the type of behaviors around the world that, people struggle with that lead them to a place like Ashley Madison. And I don't see it necessarily as a negative. I see it as an indicator of how do we learn to get better. You don't obviously I work for the company, so it's a biased opinion, but I don't moralize about why people come here. I seek to understand it. I seek to gain knowledge, and then through my job and having these conversations, I'm hoping to give people more information so they can have a better relationship.
Yeah, and so I'm curious if that is part of your job. Like, do you see that as part of your role in the company, as part of the role of Ashley Madison itself? Like finding compassion for people in affairs, because that's like a large part of what you just mentioned was, like people do it for all kinds of reasons, and instead of that like immediate shame or how dare they reaction, like, no, let's see the humanity, because people don't like usually people aren't seeking to hurt their partners. They love their partners. What they're doing is trying to meet like an unmet need. And so, yeah, seeing people as people with that compassion. But then also, yeah, I'm really curious if the company itself has certain initiatives or anything to like help people learn about this.
Well, absolutely. So part of it is we do work with academics around the world who come to us because to study specifically the nature of infidelity is very, very difficult. Additionally, researchers, seek public data, public, surveys. And unfortunately, people are going to lie about having an affair. They're not going to admit to it in some anonymous survey for fear of being caught. But if you've already signed up to Ashley Madison, there is likely an indicator that that's a space you might be interested in. So your answer is going to be more truthful than research from around the world who are always coming to us seeking a way to, gain that information. And then we use the studies when the information comes out, when we, through newsletters and emails to our members. We give back that information. And then we work with marital and sex therapists around the world as well, including a fantastic woman by the name of Dr. Tammy Nelson. She's out of California now. And she's never going to go on to a podcast or speak about how great affairs are and everyone should go have an affair. But what she does is say, listen, this is what I understand. This is the type of patients I counsel. This is the information that I've gleaned from the users at Ashley Madison, from the academics that I've read on the subject matter, to help people understand, why is it people seek out affairs, or more importantly, why people seek out discrete activities that they don't necessarily want the whole world to be involved with or visible to.
Hmm. Yeah, and so what I guess I'm so curious, like, what is, like, the first thing you would tell somebody before they turn to an affair? Like, at that crux moment where they're, like, about to maybe do it, they're considering it, they're thinking, "This might be my last resort." What would you urge them to think about and do?
I think, I would ask them to consider, what's the outcome you're seeking? Is it, because if it's purely physical, that's an activity, but is it a singular act? Is it, do you need an ongoing connection? Is it a source of relief? Because if you go and have this physical affair with the individual and it's a one-time, activity, how are you going to deal with your thoughts around that? Not to say that you're going to be burdened with shame or guilt, because that doesn't seem to be the outcome for the majority of people. There's an awareness that they very much don't want to hurt their partners, hence why they seek discretion. So all I generally say is really understand what's driving you towards here. Is there an issue in your relationship that you're avoiding, meaning you haven't communicated, you haven't discussed it, you're seeking an outlet or potentially an avenue out of your relationship? Maybe you're not aware of that, you haven't thought that through, or it's, I'm trying to preserve my marriage. So if it's one or the other, the type of affair you have will be really important to understand. So if I'm seeking an outlet and I need to get out of this marriage, I'm going to have an affair to, in an intent to actually get caught. Some people do these. Dr. Tammy Nelson calls them cannabis affairs. So who you have an affair with may not be necessarily as important, but you might want to convey to them, listen, I'm not going to be overly secretive about this. It might come out to my partner, and that's my intent. But if you're not seeking that, you're probably going to want to have a relationship with somebody who's also in a married, who is as much at risk, so they're not likely to cause the affair to be exposed as.
That's actually really interesting. I really didn't think about it from like an outcomes perspective, but yeah, you're right. Like that really dictates what you're looking for, what you choose, even yeah, like the person who's also seeking that level, right? So that also that begs the question. I think you mentioned before that, I think it was 56% of new members are single. So why are single people seeking to join a platform designed for affairs?
That's a great question. And, it's a space that we've been very interested in for quite some time. And it's really informing decisions internally at the company in terms of how Ashley Madison is going to represent itself on a go-forward basis. The real reason we believe fundamentally that we are getting such a significant increase of single people using Ashley Madison is that at our core, since the beginning, has always been this concept of discretion. We've provided a platform and a community of people who covet the discretion, not out of guilt or shame necessarily, quite frankly. And actually, for most of the singles, there's no shame or guilt to what they're doing. It's this fatigue with the traditional dating apps where the expectation is I, as a man, can log on and I can swipe right on 1,000 women a night. I can see all her pictures, all her interests and kinks, depending on the nature of the relationship. And it becomes this catalog effect where it's almost dehumanizing. And women in particular are being fatigued with it. They want discretion. They want the ability to explore within a community, but not have them be the product in and of itself. They don't want to be sold to others. And they're seeking discretion as a space to say, basically, what I do is none of your business until you're fortunate enough to be invited into my space. And I think at Ashley Madison, people tend to be more honest about who they are and what they're looking for. And I think compared to a traditional dating app, but people, I'm not saying they lie, but they put their absolute best self forward. And let's be honest, I'm not always my best self. Thursday mornings, I'm a miserable person. And you don't want to see me on Thursday mornings. But you're never going to see that on the dating app. You're going to see me in my tuxedo, in my perfect outfit. I'm going to coif my hair. And it's not a real representation. So they come to Ashley Madison, I think, because there's a bit more honesty and that the discretion that they can control and they can only let in those they seek and those they find, or believe there's a likelihood of a match. And I think those are the reasons why our business model is changing and the nature of Ashley Madison will probably be very different in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting. That discretion piece of like, "Oh, yeah, and people are gonna be more honest." Okay, like, that's starting to unravel the picture a little more of, like, this is what you guys offer that's very different than other dating apps. Because 'cause you're right, like, maybe it does play into that old narrative that we are just trying to escape now, that, like, yeah, women are this object, this, like, fantasy, we're on the centerfold of these magazines, like we've done so much work to move past that, but yet maybe dating apps are the new version of that. Maybe we are just kind of presented as a product to one another to, yeah, just be one in a million, one in 2 million of just possible options. I think there's a lot of decision fatigue with that though. So like is there any benefits to Ashley Madison in terms of
Yes.
like, yeah, okay. So talk to me about
So
that.
we have a very different operating model compared to the traditional dating. Most dating apps you pay a subscription fee, and if you're a paying member, and then you can swipe as many times basically as you want. Which is a real problem again for women because my understanding of most industry statistics show that for every one swipe a man gets on a traditional dating app, a woman gets 100. Weeding through all those profiles to find who's the right one. Again, it's daunting. It's exhausting. So at Ashley Madison, men have to buy credits to send a message to him. So it costs him money to send that first message. But, gentlemen, if that woman responds, then your conversation is free. And what's really good about that is two things. For the females, they're not getting massively inundated with every single guy just swiping. Men are being forced to be a bit more choosier. But what's great for the men is if you connect with them, and again, conversation men can be free, but what's also great about it is while you extend that, connection potentially into the real world, all your remaining credits still are housed at the system. So if that connection, whether it's like a fair or otherwise, goes on for a weekend, a week, a month, or more, once you're done with, you come back and all your credits there, and you're not paying a monthly subscription fee that's being in a sense wasted. And so we think that model, you know, somewhat eliminates that dynamic where decision fatigue sets in and there's just too much, there's too many, and I'm overwhelmed. People are purposeful, they're choiceful, and like I said before, because the nature of our platform and the type of people we've attracted, they tend to be more direct and honest about what they're looking for. So it does, in a sense, force you to read their profiles. But I tell you, men and women, you'll get a much better connection if you bother to read that. And actually gives you some insight about how to match with them first. We typically find that people have better matches that way, and we think it's a unique operating model that not only benefits men, but it also benefits the females on our site.
Yeah, I really like that. I was not aware of that model and it makes total sense. And you're right, even the subscription, like, oh, I'm wasting time. I need to go back on it. I need to like benefit from it. Like, you're right, that's not going to actually lead to somebody really sinking into the relationship that they found and this new connection. And yeah, I also really love the idea that, once it's a yes for both people, you don't have to pay for it. Cause like, yeah, the whole point is like that really points to like, it's not about getting more and more money. It's really about helping people in their goals,
Yeah,
which I think
listen,
is, yeah,
it's good. For a business, we have other features you can purchase as well that amplify your message, put you at the top of your inbox. So we're not, not in the business of making money, don't get me wrong, but we really designed this site to give you the options and give you control. And if you want to have a more simplified experience and just message a person, it's amazing. It works. And then, like I said, you're not worried that, oh, I've wasted this month's subscription because I've made a connection, but do I want to make more? You don't have to rush back to that. Those credits are going to remain there, and you can, fulfill the nature of whatever relationship you're having first and foremost, and then come back to us. And I think it's a really elegant design for how human nature, works in the dating world.
yeah. No, I really do think so, especially again, we have too much choice. We have so much. It's like a kid in a candy store thinking, "Oh, we could go here, we could go here, we could go here." And like we don't spend enough time thinking about what it is we're looking for. And I'm curious if like that is something either that's already integrated in or that you're thinking of integrating in of like some sort of questionnaire that helps people get more clear on what they're looking for when they join so that they have that kind of intention that like what am I looking for an outcome? Like is that something that could be implemented or is?
So we do ask, the types of engagements you're looking for. So whether it's erotic chat, a long-term, connection, a short-term connection, we have an anything goes option. So we do give you some prompts to give you an indication to people viewing your profile, what type of dynamic are you looking for? And we also have interest buttons that, you can click on in terms of the types of activities you might want to pursue, and those are always being updated. So we do have a lot of prompts that help you fill out your profile in advance, as well as your individual write-up that you can add to. And again, what I find, fascinating is that when you read the profiles, often people are very direct and explicit in terms of why they're here, what they're looking for. So there's no lack of clarity about the type of person you're likely to be engaging with if you connect with that individual.
Yeah, I really love that. And so talking about singles joining, let's also talk about non-monogamous people joining because
Hmm.
for, E&M people like myself, it's like, oh, cool, that's a great way to meet people. Like that sounds great. Like a little bit of discretion plus like, I get to just be really honest with my partner about, yes, I'm on Ashley Madison and this is how I'm seeking to create new connections. And so like how have you seen like the rise in non-monogamy really impacting and changing Ashley Madison?
Yeah, so we're tracking that for some time, and we would say roughly about 20% of people would now identify themselves as what we call disclosed non-monogamous, meaning the partner's aware of not participating in their activities. And I think, again, part of that is if you know the work of Dr. Wednesday Martin, she's written on this, and her theory and data suggests that non-monogamy is mostly a female-led activity, that women tend to tire of monogamy earlier than men. And that often is happening at a slightly later stage of life for a variety of reasons. So maybe mid 30s to late 40s, where there becomes this interest in saying, listen, it's not that I'm feeling unfulfilled within my primary relationship, but there's interest beyond that because we've come to a space in life where, from a pure monogamous standpoint, our partners are expected to be our best friends, our best lover, our financial partner, our social coordinator, our co-parent more often than not. And that's a lot of things for one person to fulfill. And suddenly some women are saying, you know what? I don't need to burden you with all these things. I want somebody who's going to go dance with you. You don't dance. I'm going to go dance with this person. And I'm not going to hide it. I'm not going to make it more than what it is. But that's a form of disclosed non monogamy. And what people are choosing Ashley Madison for is, again, it goes back to the discretion, because if you're now 35, 40, 45, and maybe you've got a career going, you've got family, maybe you have kids, you don't want the whole world to know what you're exploring, how far you're going to explore, because for so many people who dip their toes into non-monogamy, they're not sure how far they're going to take it. They're not sure what it looks and feels like. And so to expose yourself on a traditional dating app where everything has to be out in the open, and you're going to put that big banner that says E&M or CNM or however you define it, and then suddenly Bob in accounting sees your profile, and that makes an uncomfortable situation in the workplace more often than not. And women, again, we really see this, in the research that we've done and in the feedback we've been given, that they're tired of those interactions. They don't want to be judged. What's wrong with a woman seeking something else outside of the norms of society? So long as it's between consenting adults, she shouldn't be judged for it. She shouldn't be shamed for it, and she should be proud of the place that she's taken her life. And I think a lot of the women who are honest, like, do that. And the discretion comes, again, not out of a function of guilt. It comes out of a function of, it's none of your goddamn business what I'm doing until you're lucky enough to be involved.
I love that. Yeah, it makes me think of, Sex at Dawn. I don't know if you've read the book or heard of the book, but it's basically talking about, like, what our baseline human genetics actually, code us for. And basically like one of the ways to think about it is like, in earlier, we're all apes kind of times, to make sure that there was that survival of the fittest. And part of the reason why women can have like multiple orgasms and are still turned on and like they could just have more and more, and why men will like ejaculate and then get tired and go to bed, is that like, once the man is done with his part, it's like, okay, well, let's see if there's another seed and another seed and another seed that we can like put in at the same time. And the sperm actually competes for one another. And so there's actually some research being shown that like only having one sperm is actually making the sperm more lazy. And so that's like kind of leading to some of the infertility results that we're seeing nowadays. So it's really interesting to see that also mirrored here, in that like, the women are the ones who are reaching out saying like, okay, there's different needs I want to get met. And again, it's not that you don't love your partner, but it is that you just, have needs. And, let's spice life up. Let's move towards a different paradigm.
And I think, to the men and women who are listening to this podcast, and, whether you're afraid or fearful of these things coming into your relationship and you don't want them type of thing, here's what I'll say. The challenge we have, and this is what I was talking about earlier, is that sex education, particularly for women, is really bad in Western culture. We don't tell women what good sex is for them. And, whether it's our educators, our parents, our churches, our governments, they just are afraid of doing it because we still live in a world where there's this Madonna whore complex. And it's very difficult for women to sort of go through this time. So what happens is a woman, if she gets married in, say, in her 20s, and sex might be great, maybe she's having a lot of fun, but suddenly, maybe at 35, at 40, she starts to really understand how her body works. She really starts to understand what drives her and is going to, be a far more satisfying sex life. And so when she turns to her husband, whether it's 7, 10, 15 years later, and says, okay, these are some things I need to incorporate, unfortunately, men, what they hear is, oh, I've been bad in bed. And men, they're not telling you you've been bad in bed. They're saying they've now discovered something about their body that they didn't know previously, and it's not your fault. If she didn't know, how could you possibly know? So don't take it as criticism, take it as opportunity. And the last point I'll make on that is, men, trust me when I tell you this. Toys are your friends. They're not the enemy. They are not your competition. If she thinks that's going to be beneficial in the room with you, say thank you and go to the store and get her what she wants because you will benefit from it. It seems so silly
Yes.
that this comes up, but honest to Pete, it really is. I hear from women all the time that men, husbands, boyfriends get so offended when when the female wants to incorporate a sex toy into the act, and it's not because you're inadequate. It's not because you're incapable. It's simply because our certain anatomies work a certain way, and take the opportunity to have the assist. I think it's fantastic.
Right. I think so many couples and people could really benefit from, like improv training, that yes and or the no but. Like it's never just this is my answer. It's okay. And how can we work with that? Or this makes me feel uncomfortable, but let's negotiate. There's even that act of like sexual negotiation that a lot of us haven't been taught. That like, how do you start a really beneficial conversation and move into, yeah, like, I don't know. The best way I like to think about it is improv. Yeah. Practice
No, I
improv
think
and
that's great.
sex.
Yeah, like take it out of the bedroom, enjoy the conversation. Yes, and yes, okay, I can't do that, but yes, I can do this. It's a playful space. That's the other part to it. I'd say to people, remember, sex is fun. It should always be fun. Sometimes it's silly, sometimes it's passionate, but what it should never be is routine. What it should never be is formulaic. And when you fall into that trap, trust me when I tell you, you may think you are Don Juan, but you are not. And what I'm not saying is suddenly introduce a bunch of crazy wild things. What I'm saying is whether you're 20 years in a relationship, 30 years, still buy flowers. Still pay that compliment on both sides of the equation, both the men and the women. And take date nights. You know, if role play is your thing, great. If that's not your thing, great. Talk about ways and think about when you were a 20-year-old, what got you excited? What made you hot? Like, did you lose that interest or did you just, oh, I grew up? I don't know about that.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that's really inspiring me in this moment is your excitement towards, relationships and that like new spiciness. And that I think some people might have that misconception that, oh, somebody who works at a company that, advertises and not advertises, but helps affairs happen, basically, like maybe a little bit bitter on the like the relationship scale and spectrum
No.
so yeah, like talk to me about that and that
That's
optimism.
funny because I was in a marriage for 20 plus years. It was beautiful and wonderful. We have two beautiful kids. That story, that chapter of my life is now closed, but we co-parent fabulously. We literally live across the street from one another. And so now I'm dating again. And I am a traditional monogamist. I love the idea of romance. And the information I get from my members and working at this company has obviously had an impact on me. And if anything, it's reaffirmed my belief in the capacity for, deep, intimate love between two people. And I think, that's a space that works for me. And but what's also been really invigorating is the idea that there's so much more out there. And if you understand that, you can build better dynamics and relationships with your partner without that judgment. And when people come to me in my dating life and express different, interest and desire, I don't immediately judge them. I seek to understand it, not to say what I would or wouldn't do. It's more, okay, what are you really looking for? Can I play a role in that? Is that something I'm comfortable with? And in doing so, I think I'm becoming a better person. I think I'm a happier person for the very least. And in all of that makes me sort of lucky in a sense that I get all this information working in this company and then bringing it into my dating life.
Mhm. I love that. I think one thing is coming to mind too, a certain practice that, I know of it's a will, want, won't list, and so you divide it into the 3 categories of, like, write down all the things that you want, write down all the things that you will do, and write down all the things that you won't do, and that gives you so much clarity into, like, "Okay, here's my yes, here's my maybe, here's my no," and then you can, like, compare lists. I just think that's, yeah, a beautiful way to engage with that too, of like, all right, and then let's look at the wills and then play like a little improv game.
I love it. Well, I mentioned Dr. Tammy Nelson previously. She has this concept that she counsels a lot of her clients who come to her marital therapy. She says you should have at minimum a 5-year monogamy contract that you update, revise, discuss at least every 5 years. I would argue, hopefully, you do it more often than not than that. But 5 years is a good sort of example because at 25, 30, 35, we're very different people. We grow. And it's not an expression of, oh, are we going to be monogamous or not? It's more, what is our monogamy? And by that, I mean, think about it this way. We all agree that if I'm married and have sex with another woman who's not my wife, that's cheating if she's unaware. That's pretty easy. But after that, it starts to get a little bit more gray. If I go to a strip club, is that cheating? If she watches pornography without me, is that cheating? And it's amazing how many people would say yes to both of those questions in a variety of other ones. Like some people would even say, if you go to dinner or a meal with someone of the opposite sex, that is a form of cheating. I think that's pretty damn extreme, quite frankly. What I would say is if you are unwilling to tell your partner what you're doing, that's cheating, regardless of what it is. It's less the act, it's more the intent. But I understand why people do it. And so building this monogamy contract and having a set time and place to sit down, it gives you the space to, in an expectation that you're not springing something on somebody out of the blue. Because I think that's part of the issues that couples have when someone expresses, whether it's a concern, a complaint, or a new interest. Sometimes they feel it's been thrown at them out of the blue and they don't understand the context. And it's often that person has thought about it for some time and they've really taken it into consideration. They've got the nerve to a degree to finally express it, but it's not received well because they feel hijacked or ambushed. And so if you set a time and a place, so whether it's every 5 years, maybe it's every once a year, whatever it is, set a time and place where let's go have these conversations about, you can use your framework, will, won't, what was it again?
Want.
Want, will, want, won't. And you could use that framework because I think that'd be beautiful as well. But set aside time outside the bedroom, outside of a time you're fighting so that, you can be honest and direct and have your guards down. And I think that really leads to a far better connection with your partner.
Yeah, absolutely. I do the same, when I'm in partnership. Yeah, I do it on a little bit of an extreme scale. I do it like 4 times a year. We do it like quarterly and we do it with the seasons, right? And so like what are our expectations this season? But then also look a lot more long term and like, yeah, I think yearly is probably the minimum I would suggest.
Yeah,
Um,
no, I think that's great.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I really love that, and I think that's really important to talk about, and because I'm in the non-monogamy space, I forget that some people's l I don't wanna call them limitations, but yeah, like, rules and boundaries around what their partner can do outside of the relationship can feel very restrictive, and so, yeah, think about all the non-sexual acts that you could, outsource, that you could ask for to do with somebody else, and how having different perspectives, having different people to talk to, and to move with. Like even dancing, I think is a really great example. Like if you have a dancing partner that's outside of your regular relationship, that could change everything for you. And so it doesn't have to be sex. Like how else can you get your needs met? Because so much of sex is not really about, like, it's about intimacy. It's not about the physicality in so many cases. And I think that's really interesting and kind of draws back to the men versus women and why men have affairs, why women have affairs is like women are looking for that sexual satisfaction more often than not. But like you said, men are looking for more of that intimacy, that like heart space connection, which I find like that's so backwards to what most people think. And so I don't know, I guess I'm interested to touch back on that really briefly before kind of looking at what happens after an affair. Like, yeah, what does that teach us about men's desires?
I think it teaches us that men and women are far more alike than we wanted to believe. I think that, when you put a person, man or woman, in a position where they're having to or feeling the pressure to suppress their emotional needs, because quite frankly, sex is part of an emotional. Yes, there's a physical component to it that is amazing and wonderful, but women will tell you that there's an emotional component that I need in order to have the physical response you're looking for. And we think men are different. We say this so often. Men are ready to go. They'll drop their pants at the fly of a hat. It's not true. Men want to be desired. They want to be wanting. They want to be recognized within their relationship. The society has continuously dictated to us this alpha male. What I find fascinating, particularly in America right now, is that they are conservatively driving more towards the right now on that spectrum and leaning more into that traditional male role model. And I think, quite frankly, I don't think that's good for relationships. I think that's very good for Ashley Madison.
I mean, there's the upside.
It's just a reality of that. If we continually tell men of having emotions, stop, feeling things and just suppress them, the how that's going to manifest itself is not going to be the outcome you think it is. Men are not suddenly going to become these stoic, you know, guys who are comfortable not expressing emotions and not having desires and not feeling wanted. It's going to come out in horrifically bad ways, because here's the interesting thing I find: women tend to find, not necessarily amongst their whole social group, but two or three people within that social group, they'll have very close connections where they can be honest and truthful and vulnerable about things going on in life. They have a deep sharing. Men don't have that typically. Men rarely talk about how they feel, what's going on in their lives when they're amongst their male peers, because that's not acceptable. You're denigrated if you express feelings of weakness, feelings of inadequacies, and feelings of sadness. These are quote unquote female emotions, not male emotions, which is quite silly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's interesting that I heard the exact same message from the tantrika that I spoke to last week, who was talking about, yeah, working with men on their sexuality. That's exactly the same message is like, you've got to feel the emotions, you've got to be willing to feel it all. And there's so much acceptance and like, I mean, one of my favorite things is that like you really do get so much better pleasure once you move through the emotion and if you allow yourself to be with that. Like there's all those like, oh yeah, people who cry during sex and all that stuff, but like, yeah, cry during sex because it actually brings more pleasure. And there's it's a gateway through, like opening up to your emotions. Like they're all stuck if they're not being expressed. And that, yeah, like you said, it starts showing up in really scary and unfortunate ways. And can really start to pose a huge threat to relationships. And
Yeah, and I think part of that comes from a lot of the sexual education that men seek out or get is through pornography. And while pornography, in my opinion, is a wonderful form of entertainment, it is not a great sex education tool, because what you'll see more often than not is a male performer who is in fact emotionless and he's just a robot and he's just hounding away, and men take that as, oh, that's good sex, that's the role of a male. And it's lacking connection, it's lacking context because that specific physical act that you might have seen might be something you and your partner enjoy, but the before and the after, where there is that release, that emotional release I'm talking about, is absent. And just as you said, having that ability and the trust to do that is going to elevate your experiences. And I'm not saying that every guy's going to have a breakdown and cry. That's not my point. It's the ability to feel the feeling, not just the physical connection. When you get in your head and you allow yourself to, understand why you're enjoying that, why I'm connected to this person, and it doesn't just mean your partner, whether it's a transactional experience or a more casual experience, you still can have those emotional connections, those emotional releases, and it's going to lift your experiences to a whole new level, and you're going to enjoy sex so much more.
Absolutely. And that's the point in a lot of ways, right? You're going to enjoy sex so much more.
Yeah, and quite frankly, I fundamentally believe that if you can show your partner your vulnerabilities and show them that you can listen and be attentive to theirs at the same time, they're going to trust you more. They're going to be more comfortable expressing themselves because for whatever kinky thought you might think you have or desires you might have, women have as equal, if not more. They just there's a difference in terms of how they get judged versus how men get judged in that arena, and so they have to be more cautious. And so, if you can let your guard down and show them that you're a vulnerable person and trusting, they're going to let theirs. And again, it's not just your physical interaction is going to be better, your collective experience is going to be more amazing.
Absolutely. Well said. And so let's talk about what happens after an affair, right? So, the truth about what actually happens afterwards. Like, what are some stats you can share? What have you learned about the couples who have said that their relationship actually improves afterwards?
So, like I said, Dr. Ashley Thompson from University of Minnesota Duluth, she looked at the outcomes, and like she said, 30% of people felt that their primary relationship improved. That really was an indicator that they did, in fact, love their primary relationship. What they were missing was this intimate connection, and whether their partner was unwilling or incapable of providing that, they were able to find it and maintain the relationship. And some people get so upset about this, and when I talk about it, what I would push back to them and say this: her options or his options are somewhat limited otherwise. If they don't have this third route that we offer, they either compromise and have, in essence, a crappy sex life for the rest of their life. That doesn't sound particularly great. Or they divorce. But the problem with the divorce scenario is, let's say I'm 80% fulfilled within my relationship and this 20% is inadequate. Well, it's a still pretty big chunk. But I'm going to blow up 80% to go find potentially just the 20%. So none of these avenues are really realistic in our view, and it fails to incorporate the human dynamic. And I'll give you an example of that. We had a member a few years back, and I remember talking to her. She was a lawyer, uh, very well situated in her community, well regarded, and she had married a man who was slightly older, and very sadly had fallen into early onset Alzheimer's. And so in essence, she'd become a caretaker, but she still was a vibrant woman. She couldn't join traditional regular dating apps because of her job and her positioning in the community. And so she chose Ashley Madison, and she was able to find a partner who understand her spot in life. And it was so fulfilling. She talked about how it enabled her to go back and be the wife her husband needed now. It enabled her to fulfill her needs so that she felt the joy and love of supporting her husband because she had no desire to leave him. She didn't want to abandon him, but nor could she abandon her own needs and wants. And I think these are the kind of stories I like to tell because it helps people understand that not all affairs are exactly the same as what you think they are. They're not all just, seedy affairs in a hotel room with a company intern or whatever it is you imagine that they are. They're real human beings with nuances and understanding. And I think the other side of that coin though is there are some people who jump into an affair feeling that, I think my life is good, everything's fantastic, I just have this one, itch I need to scratch, and then they scratch it and then they discover, wait a minute, this is a little bit more than an itch, this is a bigger thing. I found a connection that really satisfies something that's deeper. And it isn't necessarily the individual they're having the affair with. So this isn't just a, oh, I'm going to fall in love with the person I'm having an affair with. It's more, oh, my issues are bigger or my opportunities are bigger. And I'm going to go have a different conversation now with my partner. So they might go back and have a more in depth conversation with their partner about what's really been missing. Or they might say, you know what? Clearly my primary relationship is not designed for me. And so that might lead to a separation of sorts at that point. And so people do have a variety of outcomes. We typically see it as we get caught, we get divorced. The problem with that narrative is if you really, look around your social circle, I'm going to bet dollars to donuts. You've probably known someone over the years who's had an affair, show up in the relationship. And the divorce outcome is not the majority of the ones that I typically see. I often find, interestingly enough, the relationship remains and, in fact, gets better. And people argue, well, how could it be better? Well, they're together. Well, if it was bad enough that they had an affair and got caught and then they stayed together, I can't imagine they stayed together and made it worse. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think they had some very hard conversations. They got to a point that was difficult, but they were able to maintain and rebuild their relationship, rebuild their trust. So in those instances, I would argue to a degree, the affair was a tool that bettered their relationship, regardless of the nature or the outcome.
Yeah. No, I love that, and the uplifting stories bit I love as well to kinda connect people. So I'm curious if you have any other examples, because like, yeah, you've shared some really amazing ones that, like, we don't get to hear, right? You're right. The
Yeah.
standard narrative is they went off, they cheated, they got caught, there's a big fight, and then, like, there's always this mistrust afterwards. But, yeah, do you have any other examples of, like, good
Oh my God,
stories?
yeah. Oh, great. I have a wonderful couple who they met on Ashley Madison. They were having a traditional, typical affair. They fell in love with each other, so they separated and divorced their respective spouses and then married each other. But then, fascinatingly, they discovered, you know what? The problem wasn't our previous spouses necessarily. Monogamy was our problem. And so then they chose to go down the path of collective non-monogamy, disclosed non-monogamy. So they both rejoined Ashley Madison with each other's knowledge. And I love that story because what we gave them was an opportunity to discover what was really missing in their relationship. It wasn't necessarily purely physical, it wasn't the intimacy, it was the ability to express themselves in a different way and not conform to what most people say is the one and only way to have a relationship. We should be clear that Ashley Madison is not anti monogamy. It's just we're aware that monogamy doesn't work for everybody in all its various iterations. And so there's so much more space for people to explore. And it's the judgment and the negative attitudes that people throw at them that makes them want to seek discretion. And I'll tell you this story. So this is one of my favorite stories, actually, my favorite member story, because I love this woman to death. I can tell you her name because she's publicly disclosed. Um, Bobby, and now I'm forgetting her last name. Bobby was married to the love of her life. He was a Hollywood producer, so he had a great job. He was well regarded. She had her own businesses, so she was financially stable. And sadly, he passed away. And she was a little bit older, so I'm going to say in her early 60s. And after a few years, she was seeing her therapist, and her therapist said, "Listen, Bobby, you need to get laid. You're not really depressed. You're lacking some connections here." And so Bobby signs up to a bunch of traditional websites. And it turns out most of the men her age group were looking for someone to make them lunch and fold their clothes. And she's like, no, no, no. Bobby needs some. So Bobby signs up to Ashley Madison, and she ends up having at one point she's having affairs with 7 different married men, and at various stages she meets some of the wives, and at this point these wives are saying to her, thank God you're doing that because I don't want to do it anymore. It's amazing. He's getting what he wants. I'm getting what I want. Everybody's happy. And this is my favorite part. She then turned her whole narrative, this experience, into an off-Broadway play, off-Broadway musical called The Curvy Widow, because that was her username on Ashley Madison. And I just think it's beautiful and loving. And the way she describes it is amazing. And she's just such a cool person. And again, what a different way to look at affairs. Who's thinking the 6-year-old, 7-year-old man is going to have an affair? Well, it turns out just as you get older, doesn't mean your sexual desires leave. They change, sure, but they don't leave. And so understanding that dynamic, and I think for women, I think there's this narrative out there that's long persisted that once menopause shows up, that part of the body shuts down and it's all over. Turns out, you talk to a lot of women who are postmenopausal, like, wait a minute, I don't have to worry about babies anymore. I really like sex, so I got to make a few changes, but I feel liberated. I feel invigorated. And once they're through that, the hormonal changes that are difficult to pass through, they are seeking a more invigorated sex life. Older age, I don't want to say old because I'm old, is no longer the barrier that we once thought it was. And while you might, sit here thinking, oh, dear God, is Anna and Granty having sex tonight? I don't want to think about that. Well, they are. And no, you shouldn't think about it, but just know that they are. So knock on the door before you walk in.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I've heard menopause described as a second spring so many times. And the narrative really is shifting in like older women and in older people of like, yeah, you can have the best sex of your life at 70 because guess what? You just kept getting better. Like, why would we like it's only that stagnancy and when we stop learning about ourselves that we actually end up having like less good sex or it's just like the same. But realistically, to that learning mindset, to that like, okay, we're just gonna keep learning about our bodies, about like how to please others, about what pleases us, like why wouldn't it get better? There's no reason why
That's
a thing that you
I
do
know.
maybe every week doesn't get better over time.
One of my favorite family stories is so my great grandmother went into an old age home or nursing home, I think about 95 years old, and my father was the main contact at the home. And I remember him telling me the story that yeah, about a year into her stay at the home, he got a call saying, "Mr. Keable, yeah, you need to come get your grandmother and take her out of the home." And my dad's like, "Oh, what's the problem?" "Well, your grandmother's getting naked and climbing into bed with other men." And my dad said, "Oh, are they complaining?" "Well, no." And then he's like, "What's your point? What's the problem?" And I think what's beautiful about that is that at 95 years, 96 years of age, she still had that desire for a human connection. No, they weren't having sex at 95. What they were doing is having a physical connection. But the capacity for touch and connection and intimacy at all its different levels is so human and is so ingrained into our DNA that it didn't leave her even at that stage of her life. And while it's both funny and endearing, I think it's wonderful. And I hope I quite frankly live as long as she did and had to have a similar approach and partners that accept that because I think it was beautiful that she was doing that and we get a giggle out of it. I'm sure if my dad were ever listening to the podcast, he'd give me crap for telling that story. But I love my great grandmother and I thought she was a riot. So good on her for doing that.
I love that. And was a full sound mind, or did they actually think that she was somewhat like not really thinking about it? She was just kind of doing it.
I think there was, she had certainly had, a bit of dementia for parts of it, but I think it was her real self coming through. And if you've ever had to, have the unfortunate experience of having a family member who does have Alzheimer's or dementia of some sorts, it is a difficult process, but most of their actions are rooted in them, who they truly are. They forget details and specifics around who they're talking to, but that action is born out of who they truly are and what they are truly seeking. So there's a bit more of an honesty to it more than anything else. And so what she was just saying is like, yeah, I miss having my great grandfather had passed away, I think 20 years ago prior to her being in this home. So she'd not had somebody in quite some time. And so she was seeking that out in the last days of her life. And I thought, you know what? And good for my dad for pushing back and saying, you know what? No, she's fine. If they're not complaining, nothing bad's happening here. Let's all just simmer down and just let people be people.
Yeah, right? Like that obsession with like, no, 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 they're old. We need to protect them, keep them in little boxes. And like, of course, they're not having sex. I've actually heard so much data about like, old folks' homes being actually a really frisky place. Cause like,
Absolutely.
STIs doesn't really matter anymore. And like, pregnancy, that's not a thing. And like, okay, we're frisky. Let's do it. Apparently it's the second most horny place after college dorms, which is amazing. I love
Well,
it.
you put people in an enclosed area where they, I have a dedicated audience on a daily basis. I don't know how it isn't going to happen. I don't know why people didn't think it would, but I think that's just our people are uncomfortable around the subject around sex outside of their own specific domain. Parents are very comfortable talking to their children about sex. Dear God, I don't want to hear anything about my father having sex. And so that, continues. And so it's something that I try to change in my life. So I have teenage boys, and I'm often having these types of conversations with them, and I get the eye rolls, and I get the typical teenage response. But I think it's resonating, and I think I'm raising very good human beings because what I want from them is to have the capacity to communicate to their potential partners around their interests and desires and be open similar to their partners. And in doing so, I think they're going to be better people for it.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, so many amazing insights, and I love the stories. And so, if we could round this conversation off with like one last story or one last insight, is there anything that's coming to mind of like, yeah, this is a wonderful thing to leave you with?
I think the biggest thing is, when we look at where the dating world is going, where monogamy, where intimacy, and all these aspects are leading us towards, is the world has lived the past 20 plus years in the social era, where everything we've done has been displayed, often curated, often filtered, but displayed to a much broader audience. And I think there is a fatigue with that. And I think we're going to enter an era of I'm going to keep what's mine mine. Again, not out of shame, not out of guilt, but you're going to see more and more businesses in places like Ashley Madison exist that give people the opportunity to explore the spaces they're interested in without announcing to the world that they've arrived there. And I think that switch is fundamental. It's going to be significant, and it's going to change dating and how people interact on a tremendous level.
Absolutely. Wow. So thank you so much for this really wide conversation about a topic that people are often afraid to talk about. So I really appreciate your insights and your candidness and your stories and your giggles. If there's anything else you want to promote or offer to the audience, is there anything you want to, yeah, share or promote?
Honestly, you know where our business is. If there's any interest to you, you know where to sign up on that. Talk to your partners. Be open, be vulnerable, and you know what? Find the joy in your life.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chris.